Great, thank you. Please, Ms. Powell.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation. I am the nonprofit entity that is sitting on the board of the CMTC. I am from Los Angeles-based Journey Out. We are an organization that works with victims of human sex trafficking. We have been around for 34 years. I've been the executive director for 3 years, but prior to that, I was a sergeant in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I was actually in charge of a vice unit. So I know this issue from the law enforcement end as well as now the nonprofit end, and I do have to say that funding is is extremely important. You know, it's kind of scary when we really think about the amount of trafficking victims that probably walk past us every day. And so therefore they are really hiding in plain sight. So I think the education of the public is essential, and that could be done through, we talked about billboards, information being placed in regulated businesses, and not only for the public to be able to identify trafficking, but having trafficked victims to know where to go when they need help. I think that the traffickers end up benefiting when there is a lack of communication between entities. So I think that a national and regional database would be extremely important as it pertains to information that is being shared between law enforcement and business and professional establishments. I keep hearing the same theme through everyone as it pertains to education, and it really is important. Someone needs to know if they see something, they say something, and I think some of the information and education needs to be placed in the training needs to be with emergency room personnel. Motel establishments, some of them that are illegal have been notorious for knowing that there's illegal activity. Law enforcement having their hands tied in terms of being able to put these places out of business. One thing that we have not talked about that we need to be mindful of is that human sex trafficking recruitment is being done on our college campuses. And so education is really important for the colleges to know what is going on in their area, and the college personnel, the counselors, as well as those that are attending college for the first time. My daughter went away to college in Atlanta, and Atlanta is a hub like Los Angeles is. And she left in August. By September, she was talking about the fact that she had been approached by pimps at college parties, as well as walking to the store near the college campuses. There's been prominent colleges that have had pimps that are actually living on campuses, not as students, but they've coerced or manipulated other students because they become boyfriends and end up living in the dorms. So therefore you have a vulnerable population of college-age students that don't know what to look for. You know, we teach our kids to say no to drugs and stranger danger, but we don't talk about the pimp who is trying to recruit in the malls and the bus stations, as well as not only our college campuses, but in our middle and high schools as well. Sex trafficking is in the forefront, but I must encourage you to remember the labor aspect of this, because it really is equally as important. In terms of service provision, I think that service provision needs to be cultural based. So therefore, if you're talking about victims out of massage establishments, a lot of them are going to come, or might be Mandarin speaking, Chinese speaking, to make sure that those service providers are cultural based. I think that when we also talk about the awareness aspect, I think that when it comes to law enforcement, that they not just understand what it is that they're seeing, but what other laws can be reinforced, that they understand and know what a fraudulent diploma looks like that's being displayed. When you talk about inspectors, DWP, other building inspectors that are going into locations, to be able to not only recognize that when they see 20 people that are living in an apartment building or an apartment unit, not only what does that mean, but who do they contact? So therefore, I think service providers is very important, that they work alongside law enforcement, so then when people are being displaced, that service provider is right there to be able to help. So I believe that education is definitely the key, and I think that's what's going to really combat that issue. So I thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. We're so cordial. We have a good working relationship. I enjoy working with Senator Hill. But, you guys all, I guess we'll just start with Ms. O'Malley. I really appreciated the mobile app. That's kind of interesting because I know in my local city they have a mobile app as well, but we report things like graffiti and some of these other things, but not so much the trafficking. So that's kind of interesting, and I'm glad that you brought that up because you called it reporting 1193s, correct?
MAP 1193.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can maybe use what's being done in Alameda, and I don't know, maybe through the League of Cities or CSAC, maybe trying to see if those that do have apps already, maybe this is something we add on to what they already have. But I did want to ask a specific question on your role with law enforcement. I categorize the DA under law enforcement, but what else can we be doing, or is there anything we could do so that you mentioned some of the massage therapy and whatnot, but how do we make sure that there's a tie-in with the boards and what they're doing to help you do what you're doing? Because obviously this goes hand in hand, and I'm just wondering if there's something more we should be looking at beyond the legislation that's been passed, or is it really just having the resources to go after these? Just your thoughts, please.
Well, I think that one of the efforts that we've done is to reach out to the different providers or the different regulators to have a relationship with them. So when they see something, they have someone they can come to. And I just yesterday met with someone from the licensing board from the state who said they do an investigation, and sometimes they'll bring a case to the DA's office or partner with law enforcement, and there isn't an awareness of the significance of the case, because maybe it looks like, this is just prostitution, and rather than recognize the human trafficking component. So that's really key, and this is our effort, certainly through the HEAT Institute, of really bringing all these different disciplines into the room so that we work collaboratively, and the information sharing is critical. But some of it is relationship based, some of it is having the law enforcement meet the regulation. We go out and meet with them, they come to us, and I think that's an effort that doesn't necessarily require legislation, but it definitely matters when the legislature says we should have everybody talking to each other. I do think also that there's some rules and regulations around data sharing. And in my office, we created a regional task force just to focus on labor trafficking. And part of what everyone does is they sign the confidentiality agreement so that there's some information that gets shared in the room that might be law enforcement specific, working on trying to identify areas of focus that don't become public, so that there can be that open discussion of those who are tasked with having access to, even access to places of business to go in and do the inspection as they've done in San Francisco, and where the police might need a search warrant to go in and look further in San Francisco. And so it's partnering in that kind of way, I think, is also critical. And then just the last thing is that from law enforcement perspective, as with all the other professions, and certainly this has been our effort for the last couple of years, is that there just has to be more education and training around what does it look like. That's why part of what we do is create toolkits. So the toolkit on how we did step-by-step, look at a large-scale illicit massage investigation and case. We now are building the protocol for who needs to be at the table if there's going to be an intervention, who's going to be there? Who are the victim advocates? Who are the civil lawyers in the community who actually are familiar with human trafficking and the rights of a trafficked victim from a civil perspective? Where's victim witness? Where's the housing going to be? What motel is safe? That type of thing. And those
follow-up services. Yeah.
And I think that creating those protocols and those toolkits, which has been sort of a hallmark of what we've done in my office, is really helpful for communities that don't know what to do. And so the reaction can be, I don't even know where to start, so I'm not going to really do anything, or I don't even know what I'm looking at. But I do think that with the 1193, again, excellent legislation. We could look at it now that we've had it in existence for a couple of years to see if maybe we can condense some of the verbiage that is required to be on the posters, so that people can actually read it even from a distance. If they're going by, we want something to catch their eye. We've got a poster that's around the state that has faces on it, but something to really catch someone's eye and be able to look at it quickly, so they don't look like they're reading a sign about human trafficking with their trafficker standing behind them saying, "Let's get going." Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. I appreciate that. And so just help me out, because Ms. Kendall had brought up in your PowerPoint, the 53 prohibited living quarters and 31 of those doors were locked. So would that be some of the data that would be shared with you, Ms. O'Malley, if like a task force were to get together, or kind of just trying to figure out in this data sharing, like how do we see some of these red flags that some people have either identified either through a mobile app or an organization that's gone out? How do we get this data across so that there's those follow-up action items taken? And so I'm just wondering, how does that occur now?
I mean, I think there isn't currently like a formal shared regional or state database, and that I was saying there definitely could be a use of that, because especially if it's a regulatory action that doesn't rise to the level of conviction, then another county can't easily find that information like they would be where you can easily search CLETS or something to find criminal history. But for something where like San Francisco Department of Public Health shuts down or suspends the license for a massage establishment, Alameda County isn't necessarily going to know about that. So figuring out and creating some sort of regional or state database would be very helpful.
Okay, and I'm wondering if maybe we follow up with the Department of Justice. I don't know if they would have that information, or who would be the best person to collect that or have that information to share across county lines, for instance?
Well, I think that it has to be done in county first. Correct. And then creating these regional task forces. So we have a quarterly meeting that is the 9 Bay Area counties, for instance. And so, but the task forces meet every month, or our task force does, and I'm sure San Francisco as well. And that's a place where you can share information like, wow, I was out at this place. I don't really know if it's human trafficking, but there were 31 doors were locked out of the number that I saw. Then that point triggers the law enforcement to say, all right, now let's start looking at it from a law enforcement perspective, not just a public health perspective. Then that's when, we step in and start looking at it from is this a prosecutable crime? Are there assets that are being made off the backs of these people being trafficked? And that's what kicks into, that's how all of these start, and that's how they all work. And so the regional shared data can be through technology, for sure. There's some great programs that are out. We saw at the Heat Institute, we had one panel that just talked about all these new platforms that they're building just to focus on human trafficking. And they can be modified in a way people that are given access can access them. But having that one receptacle or a bulletin board or something like that makes a lot of sense. But part of it is how are we able to share the data? And that's really a part where the legislation sometimes stands in the way of Manoush and I being able to talk about something, not really us, but people that are in one profession being able to share information with another profession. That we've been able to create these networks of confidentiality through when we look at children who are killed, child death. We've looked at it with domestic violence death. We look at it with other human trafficking cases, particularly for us around children. And I just think that's a place where it could be ripe for legislation to allow for a task force to be able to share data that, in that context, for that purpose, that might otherwise be prohibited.
Yeah, no, definitely look forward to maybe fleshing that out a little bit more under that code of confidentiality, because we are trying to prevent trafficking. And so maybe we can look at that, and the committee could follow up too as well to see if statutorily that's something that we can allow inter and intra-agencies to start sharing that data. So, no, I appreciate that. So let me just follow up real quick. I mean, is there something more that our boards and licensing entities, is there more that they can be doing, or do you feel like, they have been good partners, and like you said, when you call them, they come in, but I mean, is there something else we should be looking at? I mean, anyone?
Well, with the Department of Insurance, they have investigators who are not sworn officers, but they do investigation of insurance, false insurance claims, things like that. But they actually have an established relationship, an MOU, with the local prosecutor office in every county. Mm-hmm. And, for some of the other regulatory agencies, as I said, the CSOB representative was with me yesterday, that we were building a relationship, but there is nothing that invites or opens that door for a regulatory investigators that are doing regulatory work to be able to come to the DA's office and sit down with the staff to say, I've got a case, you have sworn officers, we need to do more, we need search warrants, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a place where the board, where your board can have a great impact in, if not encouraging or creating the vehicle for the regulatory agencies who have investigators who are not necessarily sworn to have a working relationship with the local law enforcement who are sworn, so that when there are cases, and I appreciate the revocable registration process, but as Manoush was talking about, that they will close down one and pop up somewhere else. So I personally like to take away their assets, take away their resources, so that they can't open somewhere else and they can't bring 50 more women in and put them into servitude. And so I think that would be something that would be very helpful for the regulatory agencies to know this is a connection and this is a relationship, but also for law enforcement and prosecutors to know this is a relationship. So when someone comes to you, you don't say, well, I don't know, who are you? Mm-hmm. You investigate, collapsed balconies or something. And so, I think that that's a really important linkage that will help facilitate and close the gaps.
I think just following up on the education that everybody mentioned, so I was thrilled to hear that the Board of Barbering Cosmetology is now incorporating workers' rights into their education, and I think more efforts like that, or maybe requiring that, is really important. I know there's a bill to require certain notices in nail salons, just whatever information that can be gotten out to people who potentially are trafficked about what their general labor rights are is super important in getting information to people about what their rights are and who to call if they're having a problem.
And I have to agree as well. I actually do go out and do the education piece to physicians in the emergency rooms, and they are, you can tell during my presentations, there's so many things that they don't know. Or while I'm talking, you could see the light bulb going on, or I've had that case. So I think the education piece is so important through all the entities that we talked about today. And not only to know how to identify it, but what to do once you see it. Because it's just like they were saying, is that when someone doesn't understand what it is that they're seeing, it's easier just to ignore it and go on my way. I think that's what I saw, but I'm not sure. But really understanding who can they call and to ensure, and that's where the funding piece is important, that there are service providers that are out there that would be able to answer that call when it happens. Not only for them to be able to answer those calls, but to be able to also answer law enforcement's call when they have victims as well. So all of those pieces do intermingle. And the other thing that I just wanted to preface the fact is that when we talk about sex trafficking and labor trafficking, that sometimes the two do intermingle, that they might be also both taking place with that same victim.
I have one other thing to follow up on what Nancy said about SB 1193. So one area that the law left unanswered was who actually is required to do the enforcement of that. And so some counties have been very proactive, like Alameda County, and they've set up a whole system. Other counties, no one's really doing it. But there is a way, to the extent that some of the businesses that are required to post the notice are regulated, that as part of their regular, getting approved, that they have to certify that they have the poster up. So if that law were to be tinkered with, I completely agree with Nancy that I think the language is a little too cumbersome on the notice, but that also to include an enforcement provision. And one way to do that for the businesses that are listed, that are regulated, is to require that, as part of, if it's a bar, as part of their getting their liquor license, they have to certify that they have the poster up.
Got it. Thank you. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a couple, and just to follow up on the education part, which I think I indicated initially, I think that is the key part of this. And Ms. O'Malley raised and we're talking about it at different areas, whether it's restaurants, but also in the construction industry. And I'm wondering if we've looked at or addressing the Contractors License Board, or to educate contractors as something to be aware of. Just as you were saying, when you're out in the field and you see something that looks funny, but you don't know, it's not right, but you have no way to connect it, no frame of reference to put it together, that could be a way. So I think perhaps we should look at the entire spectrum of the Department of Consumer Affairs, right, and all of those bodies, because every one of those regulatory bodies deals with some form of the public who then branches out to every. So I think we need to look at each one to see how they interact with the public and whether there's a chance for exposure and benefit there. And Ms. Kendall, the issue, one of the slides was the 563 massage establishment inspections in 2015. What I guess for me, and I just need a little clarification, they issued 272 violations, and they're listed there. And are those the only sanctions or effect of those violations? Were those 12 suspensions?
Yeah, so in San Francisco, there's a whole we don't have this easy revocable process. There's a whole administrative hearing that people go through, and often the hearing officers are reluctant to impose serious sanctions. So yes, of those, and people are giving an opportunity to cure, right? So some of these, like the unsanitary conditions or so forth, that the business may have been able to respond to that. But yes, of the 272 violations, there were 12. The outcomes were 12 suspensions.
I mean, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I also the other thing that happened in 2015, to be a little more fair, is that we did pass a local ordinance that created for the first time a requirement that not for the first time, but brought it back, a requirement that all massage establishments go through a conditional use permit process. And so the resources of our Department of Public Health were very much taken up with processing all of those permit requirements. So I think in 2000, we had more suspensions in 2014, and I think in 2016 it'll be up again. So 2015, I think, was a bit of an anomaly because some of the resources were pulled into processing the permits that were created by our new ordinance. So.
Okay, and then one just final question or thought is the issue of communication. And the challenge that was raised in closing down in San Mateo County, they moved to San Francisco or Alameda and open up there and get closed down there, and there's no way to really understand that. There's one, and it may be possible, and I don't know, and this is without talking to the CAMTC on this, but they now register massage therapists. I don't know if and we could ask if their their certification of that lists their employment location, and I don't know if it does on there when they're certified. So that may be a potential place if they're notified. CAMTC is notified by a jurisdiction when an establishment is closed down, or they could just register establishments as well as something that could be possible. Then when an establishment closes down here and they open up there with the same ownership or some thread that connects them to the other location, it would be very obvious and could be made aware of that. So maybe we'll talk to them a little more and see if there's some possibilities there.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is sometimes the owners aren't necessarily licensed through CMTC. The owner may not have a permit. Yeah, so
they would be registered as an establishment through CAMTC, and that owner would
yeah.
be
So now, my understanding is it's the localities that have the jurisdiction to license the businesses. CMTC doesn't deal with that.
They may not have that today.
Yeah, I think there was a preference for the counties to be able,
and they should
to
be
keep
able to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, no one wants to take that authority away from them. But as a registration, it may be something possible since there's no thread to connect these establishments throughout the state. That may be one way. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Anything else you'd like to mention before we conclude?
I'll just finish with.
Please.
Thank you. With the Heat Institute, we finished our last hearing and have had our retreat. And as you may be aware, that there are 19 members representing all the different disciplines, including medical, behavioral health, the child welfare, law enforcement. It was very, very much multi-jurisdictional, and both of these women testified for us. But that report is due to come out in August, which is probably in the country, we believe, the first multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional assessment of human trafficking. And part of what we have identified as our next steps is that we identified that there's no actual medical protocol for responding to somebody who's a victim of human trafficking. There's a medical protocol to respond if someone has a dog bite or has bee stings, but not for human trafficking. So we have formed a subcommittee already led by our medical member to start building that protocol. And I think that these are ways also as to engage as you've been talking about, engage all these different professions to then go back and engage their own communities, but then come back to some place where we can all make sure that it covers all of the areas that we all know from a perspective of looking at this as from human trafficking perspective. So we're anxious to get the next phase moving, and also to get our report to you, the legislature.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and perhaps talking about the protocols does force that discussion and that collaboration. So thank you. Thank you for your testimony today and for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let me go ahead and open it up now to public comment. Do we have any public comment? Please come to the mic. Thank you.
I'm a little unaccustomed to not being in a queue. Good morning. My name is Tony Psychotis. I'm the Government Relations Chair for the American Massage Therapy Association California chapter. American Massage Therapy Association is the largest nonprofit association representing professional massage therapists. We appreciate the Joint Committee taking an interest in the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking taking place under the guise of licensed professional practice, and more specifically in brothels posing as massage therapy businesses. We strongly support the efforts of the California Massage Therapy Council to strengthen certification and to keep criminals from obtaining that certification through fraudulent means. We enthusiastically support the efforts of local government and law enforcement to identify and close brothels posing as massage businesses, and recognize the value of a revocable registration as a means to that end. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Additional public comment. Hearing and seeing none, let me turn it back to the dais for closing comments.
I appreciate the leadership again, Mr. Chair, and really appreciate the comments from the panelists today. It was very insightful, very helpful, I think, and gives us some directions to where we should go. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And let me just say, first let me thank everybody for coming. All of our panelists for being a part of this discussion. You know, one of the things we're always tasked with is how do we improve and how do we make things better, right? How do we prevent human trafficking, whether it's labor, whether it's prostitution. So I think what we heard today are maybe some ideas we could start following up with. I know I just tasked the committee staff with following up on several ideas, whether we follow up through statute and create legislation, or whether we just talk to the boards and make sure that folks are talking to each other. I mean, we heard earlier in a panel, just based off the discussion here, that they're going to implement different approaches and new ideas. And so the goal is for us to learn best practices, learn what others are doing, and implementing that so that we can prevent this from happening in our communities. And so I just want to thank everybody for doing that. Obviously, this will be an issue ongoing, as much as we don't want it to be ongoing, and we could say it's eradicated, but so isn't the world. So as we move forward, know that you do have folks in the legislature that do want to be helpful and help promote this discussion and actually help with these elements in our communities and in our society. So thank you all for being here. And with that, we will conclude this informational hearing. Thank you.